the remainder of services, our pastor again, Mr. Burnett.
Thank you. I'm going to do probably what's considered a big no-no and start out the message today reading 5 scriptures in a row at 2:51 in the afternoon. Let's do that. Let's go to John 16:33. What do these 5 verses, these 5 passages have in common? As we read through these today, think about what summation points you would make from that, and think about it from a very personal, not self-inflicted, just a self-evaluative approach. John 16, verse 33, many of these are familiar, very familiar to us. Christ makes this statement at the conclusion of interacting with his disciples prior to going and praying before God, that prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane. John 16, verse 33, he states this: "These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation." It's going to happen. You will have this. But be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. Acts 14. Acts 14, let's look at this. Paul makes this statement as he is in the area of Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch. Acts 14, we'll read verse 22. Paul makes the statement as he's working with them, interacting with all of these Gentiles who are coming into the faith, part of the church. He was strengthening the souls of the disciples. He was exhorting them to continue in the faith and saying, listen, we must, through many tribulations, enter the kingdom of God. We must, in order to enter the kingdom of God. Galatians 6. Galatians 6 is our third one. This one I know is very familiar. Galatians 6, verse 9. Galatians 6, verse 9, Paul, in the midst of talking about sharing and bearing one another's burdens and our role and responsibility as Christians to intercede for one another and help others, keeping in mind our inadequacies and our shortcomings and staying humble, he says in verse 9, don't grow weary. Let us not grow weary while doing good. He doesn't say that unless that is something that can happen. For in due season, we shall reap if we do not lose heart. Our final 2 passages are Hebrews 3 and Hebrews 6. Hebrews 3, let's look at that. Hebrews 3, this statement is made by the author of Hebrews. We think there's a strong likelihood that it was the Apostle Paul, but we read here in Hebrews 3, verse 12, he makes the statement, beware, brethren, lest there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief. You think, how could that happen? How could that happen for us as God's people? We come here every Sabbath, we interact with one another, we are keeping the Sabbath. How could we get to the point to where something could develop in us an evil heart of to where we come to be comprised of an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God? But instead, he says, exhort one another daily while it's called today. Well, I guess it is today, isn't it? So we are to exhort and encourage one another today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. That can happen. He says, verse 14, for we have become partakers of Christ if we hold the beginning of our confidence steadfast to the end. Don't harden your hearts as in the rebellion. Don't do that, he says. Stay steadfast to the end. Finally, Hebrews 6, across the page for me. Hebrews 6, verse 10. For God, as God looks at us, as God sees what we're doing here as his people, God is not unjust. He's not. He's not unjust in any way. And in this particular case, he's not unjust to forget our work. God sees our work. He sees the work that each of us does individually within our families, within the congregation, as we serve in our workplace. We serve to the best of our ability in our work as if pleasing God, as we refer from the other passages that talk about servants to their masters. God sees that. He doesn't forget your work and your labor of love which you have shown toward his name, in that you have ministered to the saints and do minister. the writer here saw that the brethren were doing that. They were serving. He says, and we desire that each one of you show the same diligence to the full assurance of hope until the end. Don't stop. That you do not become sluggish or slothful, as the Authorized King James states, but you imitate those who through faith and patience inherit the promises. What are these passages telling us? If you were to bring it all together, I think they're telling us several things. They're telling us you and I are going to experience tribulation. Many of us have already have, to one degree or another, experienced tribulation, sore trials, sore difficult challenges in our lives, and it will continue at times in our lives to the end of our lives. It will continue. Christ said it would. He said it would happen. We can become hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. We can be, and not only that, not only are we talking about our own sins that can cause us to be hardened by that, the deceitful of sins, but in other cases we see situations where the effects of others' sins upon us, especially those who are very close to us, their sins that they're struggling with affect us. And in some cases, those can result in a hardening that takes place in our lives if we allow them to do so. He also says we can become lax in our diligence. We can become sluggish in our approach towards the Christian way of life. I want to discuss an area today, an area I think of all of our lives, of every person in here, that all of us experience, and that, if not handled and managed properly, it can play a role in these negative traits developing. Lax in diligence, hardening of the heart, sluggishness, growing weary in well-doing, even to the point of developing a heart of unbelief that some have developed over the years, ultimately departing from the living God. That area is simply this: how we deal with stressful situations. How we deal with stressful situations, and not only how we cope with stress, how we react to stress, but secondly, how we proactively approach the stresses that will occur in our lives. I want to talk about that today. How many of you, and you get to raise your hands on this, and I want you to be truthful, and I want the arms to really pop up nice and solidly if this is the case. How many of you are dealing with at least one stressful situation in your life right now? How many of you are doing that? And just hold it up for a second. I just kind of want to look. I would say about 3/4 of you, maybe 4/5, 6/7 of you are in that situation right now in your lives. I, in preparation for the sermon, I got to think, okay, well, maybe I should think about that in my life. So I counted yesterday. I just jotted some things down right away, and I came up with 15 that I'm dealing with right now. And I would say at the same time, I'm very happy. I'm very upbeat. The stressful situations are pretty minor, but they are. I am dealing with some stressful situations right now, and I say that. And yet this is a pretty good time. I think it's been a pretty good time. There are times when things are much more stressful than they are right now for me. And I don't say that to elicit your sympathies. Come here and pat me on the back. I really need a boost. And let me just up it to like 23 and see what kind of input I get from people. But I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that because I think my situations fall in very similar situations to most of us out here. We have various stresses that are going on. Some are somewhat minor that can explode. Some are huge in our lives that we're dealing with right now and pretty much black out every other stress that we're having because the one is so huge. But we all are going through things. And brethren, as we read in the scriptures, the fire can go out. The fire can go out. The desire can wane. The love can wax cold. It can happen. The scriptures say it can happen. The heart can become hardened. The heart can become hardened. We can suffer shipwreck, and we can burn out spiritually. Let me just give you a couple of scenarios just to come up with some ideas. Middle-aged woman. I don't know if you would consider yourself a younger middle-aged woman. Maybe you're an older middle-aged woman. Maybe you're just a straight-up middle-aged woman. But a middle-aged woman working working, has a job 30 to 40 hours a week. Some stresses going on with her husband right now, not the best situation. Some stresses with the children, some pressures there. Pressures at work, the challenges that are going on there, maybe not as well supported by her superiors or some struggles with coworkers. Pressures being placed upon her in service to the church and feeling everything coming in on her. That's stress. Has it led to burnout yet? We'll talk about burnout in a little bit. No, but she's experiencing that. Middle-aged man, late middle-aged man, younger middle-aged man, whatever you are, working, striving to continue to provide for the family to the best of your ability. You see restructuring happening within the workplace, challenges there. You may not have as solid of a job as you thought in the next month or two. You may be looking for work. Challenges in the home. You're hoping to come home after the stress of the day and have some peace. There is not peace in the home. There are challenges. There are problems with the house, problems, some situations with your spouse, things with the children. Again, pressures with church, pressures in various areas, and they're weighing on you. I can say that with elderly folks, health situations, the energy to do what we used to be able to do, the health factors that are slowing us down, the intensity of focus that we're recognizing that we don't have like we used to, and it's very frustrating, and the degree to which we feel like we can't serve like we have before, and how are we, and we feel like, am I useful to the church? I used to do this, but now those younger than I are doing that, and what is my role there? What is my role with the church? I feel I can't do the things that I used to be able to do. My wife is in poor health. My husband is in poor health, whatever the situation. Teens preparing for the next school year, the challenges that and the wall that has to be put up there, the being on guard, the pressure of maintaining God's way of life, thinking right thoughts, behaving in a correct way, saying things in a godly manner in an area, in an environment that I'm going into that is not geared that way. The challenges that I see sometimes in my family, the challenges that I see with my parents, the challenges that I see with my siblings, I feel the stress of the conflict that happens there. I feel the stress sometimes of the challenges that I know my dad bears with work and such. The situations that my dad and my mom have to bear with just the time that's on them, and trying to figure out how I can help, but I have these issues of being connected with others and making sure that I'm serving God as I ought. Young adults, just pick an area of life. There are stresses that are there. So I ask you, would you say you are waxing or are you waning right now? Are you on the wax? Are you waxing hotter and hotter, or are you waning? Are you moving towards being ever hotter for God's way of life and for the calling, or are you waning? What is burnout? Because burnout can begin to set in. These scriptures talk about, to some degree, giving examples of how burnout can occur. But I'd like to read from a couple of sections of some material that I gathered recently. One was from a study research paper that was put together by 4 authors. Very difficult to pronounce their names, Europeans and Eastern Europeans, but they did a definitive paper on the subject of burnout. Of course, they dealt with it from the workplace, but the title is the definitions, the recognition, and the prevention of burnout. In defining what this is, again, I ask us to think about this on a personal level. Do you sense any of that beginning to sneak in at times in your life? The burnout metaphor implies not only that somebody had to be burning, i.e., again, this is directed at an employment perspective, but strongly liked his job or was strongly committed, etc., before he or she would be able to burn out. But also that once a fire is burning, it cannot continue to burn unless resources are provided to keep it burning. In other words, employees' energy or capacity to work can diminish over time when the work environment does not provide resources and is especially demanding. In a terminal stage, at the end of it, a state of physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion will occur from which it is hard to recover. There's another metaphorical meaning of burnout. Somebody could only burn out if he or she was burning before. Thus, engagement, enthusiasm, and interest in someone's job are a necessary precursor of burnout. Now, of course, and this is a different subject, but some people never had the fire burning in the first place. And if we find ourselves in that position, stir up the gift of God which is in you. Continue to go back to the first principles of what our truths and our beliefs are, reprioritize and get going. But burnout can occur more frequently than that situation in terms of those of us who are here. We're here because we know the truth. We're here because we believe the truth. We're here because we believe this way is God's way of life. But again, most of us battle with stresses, and can that lead to eventually burnout? Again, I'm not talking only about work, even though this article does, but relationships, our spiritual lives, parenting, marriage situations. Do these things, where are we on our stress level with those presently? Just quoting again from the article, in a more general way, burnout can be seen when we get to this stage of burnout as a state of exhaustion in which one becomes cynical about the value of one's occupation and doubtful of one's capacity to perform. Have you ever been under such stress, such prolonged stress, that you begin to move into that cynical phase? I've skirted on that a few times in certain situations in my life, and it's a dangerous area to go. Thankfully, I've just skirted it, like nicking the atmosphere and bouncing back off, and gotten out of that. But that is one critical sign of I am moving close to burnout. One of the most, continuing from the paper, one of the most radical definitions representing the general nature of burnout is provided by Maslick and Leader back in a paper they wrote in 1997. Burnout is the index of the dislocation between what people are and what they have to do. It represents an erosion in value, dignity, spirit, and will, an erosion of the human soul. It's a malady that spreads gradually and continuously over time, putting people into a downward spiral from which it is hard to recover. It is a dangerous area for a Christian to enter or to move into that area. And concluding their write-up here. In summary, burnout can be defined as feelings of exhaustion, cynical attitude towards the job and the people involved in the job, and through a reduced personal accomplishment or work efficiency. In a radical meaning, burnout takes away a person's spirit and will. Contrary to popular understanding, burnout can be found also outside the human service professions. Now, most burnout is more likely to occur in the workplace in areas where it is very people-intensive. But it can also happen in other occupations. However, burnout still may be a greater problem in occupations where employees are more in interaction with others rather than dealing with things and information. Burnout is not something that occurs overnight. It is something typically that is a prolonged and slow process. Stages of burnout. So I say again that this is directed towards the workplace, but think about this in our lives, with our marriages, with our parenting, with our spiritual lives, with the challenges that we've faced in the church over the years, with the challenges that we have in interacting with one another as part of a body here, a congregation here in Dallas. Here are the stages of burnout, according to this article. And take a look at where have you been on this? Have you ever gotten into some of these areas? Stage one, a high workload, high levels of stress, high expectations. I think many of us have been in that situation. Stage two, we move into physical and emotional exhaustion. physical and emotional exhaustion, chronic exhaustion, even higher energy investment in order to execute all job tasks, sleep disturbances, those kinds of things. And then stage 3 begins this step down into the abyss, this stage of depersonalization, when a person goes to cynicism and they become indifferent. I don't care. Whatever they want to do, it doesn't matter to me. Just do it. I'm done with this. That kind of a stage. And then finally, the last stage of burnout is despair, helplessness, and insufficiency. As we think about that, have you known individuals, church-wise, who have moved into that, who have gone to that point in their lives? It's very, very sad to see. It can happen in marriage. It can happen in our parenting, in our relations with one another. It can happen in the workplace. It is a very, very dangerous area to find ourselves. Let's address that today as we spend the rest of the time dealing with this in the rest of the message. We remember the story of Elijah. I think Mr. Kylo may have talked about that in his recent message on the enemies of faith. But the situation where Elijah had served God faithfully, the prophets of Baal, he went up against God. Obviously honored his offering that he had set up there, and the fire came down, and huge victory for God's people that day. And then right after that, Jezebel says, "You're a dead man," in a sense. He's running for his life, and he sits under the tree. "God, take my life. I'm no more worth this than anything, just in my life." Moving into that point of ups and downs to the point where he despaired even of his life. We can get into situations in our own lives that can lead to this, situations that are very different from Elijah's, but still very legitimate situations for us individually. One means, as we look at the rest of the message today, one means by which we can avoid burnout is first to just take a hard look at the key areas of stress in our lives right now. I mean, it doesn't take much for us to do a couple of things during the service today while the sermon's going on. So think about that. What are the key areas of stress that you are experiencing presently in your life? What are they? Do they tend to fall along the lines of your family situation? Do they seem to be a little bit more work situations? Are there some challenges within our congregation? You know, where do those lie right now? Are they some personal struggles, some personal sins that we're really, really struggling with conquering? But take a look at those, think about those, and let's ask ourselves, one, how can I better cope and manage these stresses when they strike? Reactive. How can I better react? You know, some say, well, you got to be proactive. Well, yeah, we do need to be proactive, but we also need to be reactive. We need to react in a godly manner when things hit us out of the blue. And we get hit, don't we? We get hit out of the blue on many occasions. And so we ask ourselves, am I handling these things in a godly way? Am I? How can I improve? So that's one area that we're going to look at today. And then secondly, what approaches should I take towards stressful situations ahead of time? But before the things are coming to me, what kind of mindset, what kind of an approach do I need to have ahead of time that is going to help prepare me for these situations that I can go forward and get through them when stresses come my way? Because I know they're going to come my way. We don't want to be shocked. Oh, I'm dealing with stress right now. I have a trial. That's a shock. You know, we know that God says that is the way it is to be for us. So let's seek out the answers to these two questions. And in our own lives, of course, once we receive answers, we strive to implement them in our lives. God's Word has much to say about this area. And we'll look at a few of these here in a few minutes. Let's turn first, if we could, over to Job 35. One of psychology today defines stress. We talked about burnout, defines stress as simply a reaction to a stimulus that disturbs our physical or mental equilibrium. In other words, it's an omnipresent part of life. A stressful event can trigger the fight or flight syndrome. You know, the hormones are kicking in, adrenaline, cortisol, and that can be a good thing to keep us safe in a situation. Stress in a specific situation can key us up for an event that is very stressful and help us get through that with focus and attentiveness that's required. But chronic stress or long-term chronic stress can have detrimental effects on health. Now, and two, when we talk about stress, I want to say this with stress. Stress is not always the cause of burnout. Stress can be a factor that leads to burnout, a continued stress over time, but it's not always the key factor leading to burnout. There are many factors that can lead to burnout, but we're going to talk specifically about stresses, impact of stress leading to that today. The 6 myths of stress from a Psychology Today article by Sherry Board Carter are this. Stress is the same for everyone. Don't tell me that. We know that. The stress is not the same for everyone, and your stress is your stress. For you to say, you know what, Burnett's stress is much more major than my stress, so why should I even be stressful? I need to decide to not be stressed out because his stress is way more than I should, so I need to compare mine with his, and mine's so little, I shouldn't be stressed. No, our stress is our stress, and it's not the same for everyone. Another myth is that stress is bad. Stress is not always bad. Stress can be good. Stress can be good at times. Another thing is that stress is everywhere and we just have to live with it and there's nothing we can do about it. We can manage stress, and God expects us to manage stress, to cope with it. The other one is the most popular strategies for reducing stress are the best ones. No, it's very individualized. It's like workout programs. Workout programs should be individualized for that person to best serve that person. The other one, no symptoms, no stress. If I don't have any symptoms, I must not be stressed out. No, there are underlying things that are going on. And only the major symptoms of stress require attention. Those are all myths of stress. We see in Job 35 a statement of one of these, what we would call negative copers, coming out in Job's life. Before I read that, I want to ask you these questions with respect to stress. How do you cope with stress? An article by Tubesing and Tubesing back in 1983 talk about negative copers to stress. Listen to these and see if any of these apply to you or have applied to you at time. One negative coper for stress is alcohol. Man, if I can just get a couple of beers or I need that wine to settle me, and actually a couple of glasses, actually maybe 3 or 4 would really kind of get the edge off, and if I get around 6, hey, I'm doing all right. This is good. I can get through this. Bring on the stress, baby. I can take it. Some people go to alcohol. They drink to change their mood. Now, granted, Scripture talks about how wine cheers the heart of God and man. But we of course, understand as well there is moderation, and drunkenness is a sin. But some use the negative coper of alcohol. Do you find yourself coming home from work, coming home from the end of the day, and I've got to have a drink? I just got to have a drink to settle. It's becoming a negative coper for us, if it is. Denial. Nothing's wrong. I mean, nothing's really wrong. I ignore the problem. Happy. We're all going to be happy. We aren't stressed. I'm just happy. Have you seen folks that try to do that? Have you tried to do that? I'm just going to happy my way out of this stress. It's interesting seeing that approach. Abuse. If I just can have like 7 or 8 cups of coffee a day, every half-hour period, I'm still on it. I can handle stress. Drinks, that kind of thing, abuse coffee, aspirin, medication. Some say, man, I just need to smoke a bowl. If I can smoke a bowl every day, man, I really can handle the stress in my life. Some do that. And they find themselves old and 60 and 70 and 80, and they still need their bowl to smoke if they're still alive to cope with stress. Eating, some binge. Some use food to console them. Some go on a diet. They go from one diet to another to try to, instead of really dealing with the stress in their lives. Some over-exercise. I remember a situation about 20 years ago of a fellow with whom I worked, that I worked in the PE department, and he was just constantly up there working out. As I would go here and through the department, I would always see this guy up there working out. And come to find out later, he admitted to me he was just going through a horrible marriage situation, and that was his way of coping. Couldn't deal with it. I'm just going to go work out. So even exercise can be over-exercise, a negative way of coping. Fault-finding, judgmental attitude, complaining, criticizing, illness. And again, this is more of a byproduct than a focus kind of a thing, but developing headaches, nervous stomach, major illness, accident-prone, just continued kinds of things like that. Indulging, just staying up late. Why am I staying up late? It's 3 o'clock in the morning and I'm still up, and I'm sleeping in. I'm buying on impulse. I'm wasting my time. I'm indulging. I'm experiencing passivity. I just hope it'll get better. I know it's very stressful, but I don't really want to do anything about it. I just hope, if I just wait and hope, I think it'll get a little bit better. Just give it time. Maybe I'll catch a lucky break. I don't know. I'll wait. Revenge. I'm not going to get mad. I'm going to get even. Be sarcastic. Talk mean. Some get stubborn when they deal with stress. Be rigid. Demand their way. Refuse to be wrong. I'm going to do this the way that I do it. And now we're going to come to Job's situation, as Job was counseled in a wrong way by his three friends. And then Elihu comes along and gives him some very sound counsel as he's listened to Job go on about some of his difficulties. This area of negative copers of stress is called tantrums. I don't think Job threw a tantrum, and obviously we recognize Job was a righteous man who served God faithfully and went through a trial that is just unbelievable to try to grasp what he did, what he had to go through. But some yell, some mope, some pout, some swear, some rant, and drive recklessly. Job, in a sense, has gone on a bit of a rant as time has processed, as time has continued. And it comes to the point where Elihu makes this comment to Job in chapter 35, verse 13. Job 35, verse 13, he says, "Surely God will not listen to empty talk." There came a point, and Job recognized this later after God brought him to him and began to talk with him about God's greatness, some of the things with which Mr. Evans talked about in the sermonette. Job pulled back and recognized, I have uttered things I did not understand. What was I doing? I repent in dust and ashes. I abhor myself. I see what I've done. He experienced a bit of empty talk in some of his dealings with God down the stretch. Surely God, Elihu says, surely God will not listen to empty talk, nor will the Almighty regard it. Although you say you do not see him, where is God? Job was wondering. You do not see him. He says, but yet justice is before him. Justice is before God, and you must wait for him. You must wait for him, Job. And now, because he's not punished in his anger, nor taken much notice of folly, therefore Job opens his mouth in vain. He multiplies words without knowledge. Job later recognized that as he dealt with a bitter trial. And Job repented and moved forward. But we can cope in that way. We can withdraw. Have you been around a person who is so stressed out that they just simply withdraw? They avoid the situation. They skip school. They skip work. They keep the feelings to themselves. And then, of course, the area that Mr. Kylo discussed as one of the enemies of faith, worrying. Worrying, that the fretting, the imagining the worst, these kinds of things can eat at us, and they are all negative copers of stress. Let's turn over to 1 Peter 3. So let's in the remaining time of the message today, let's go through let's first discuss some proactive considerations, some things that we can do proactively ahead of time to deal with the stress that we'll face in our lives. First, and very importantly, we must take the time to analyze and determine the cause of the stress. A lot of times, people, I don't know if it's our busy lives or whatever, but we do not take the time to just pull back. I'm going to look and see what is the cause of the stress that I'm experiencing right now. Sometimes we can come to an understanding of how to better the situation and reduce our stress. Sometimes there are things we can do. I'm so stressed out about work. Every day I got to fight the traffic, and it's just killing me. It's this time, and I don't know when this accident might happen or this happened, and then I'm stuck, and I can't get to work on time. It's very stressful. Go to bed sooner at night. Go to bed sooner. Maybe that's an option. Leave sooner in the day. Get to the workplace earlier. Have some downtime before I start work so I can kind of ease into the day and then take things from there. Sometimes an answer is readily available that we can implement, but sometimes there are other ideas and approaches that we can take in order to cope with it. I'm going to give a bit of a shotgun approach at this today. Maybe write down some of the ones that you may not be implementing that you think might be helpful in your life. Again, it's not a one-size-fits-all here. Some of these things, many of us, I believe, are already doing. But let's look at some of these. The one that is very important, and again, these are basic kinds of things, but start the day in prayer. Some of you may be night people, where you feel like my best time to focus and pray is when everybody's gone to bed and I'm there in the office or I'm there in the house, the kids are asleep, and I'm kind of more of a night person. I can study and reflect and meditate and pray and get my main praying time in then. That's good. If you are that kind of a person, do that. But at the same time, we need to start our day off with prayer. Spend some time doing that. Many of us are morning people, and we do that. It comes easier to us. But regardless, we need to start the day in prayer. It gives us a focus towards the things that we'll experience as the day goes on. And this is something that we've learned over the years. Some of these things came up in a recent Focus Mentoring Program group study that Mr. Dick Thompson conducted with some of the ministers in that program. I'm sharing a few of those with you today and quite a few that were not covered as well. But one of the things that did come out there that is something that Lisa and I have been able to do that really helps us is start the day with a relaxing ritual. Now, I know some of you got to get up at 5 to get to work by 6:30, this kind of a thing, and it's not as easy for folks. My schedule tends to be more of the day really starts work-wise at around 9-ish or so, and then goes till whenever bedtime is late. But it just kind of goes out that way. So we've got some downtime, and I love starting the day at 8 o'clock, and sometimes it's 8:05 and 8:06. Lisa knows 8:12, but I try to make it 8 o'clock. Where come out, we have coffee. We have coffee. Lisa sits over on this side of the living room. I sit on this side. We face each other. We've got our coffee with I like half and half. I like a little stevia. I like a little sugar. I like a dessert coffee. Some of you are like, you got to be tough. I like the half and half. I like a lot of half and half. But we have that, and we get the Sam's Club cinnamon rolls. I don't know if you've had that little advertisement here on the Sabbath. Probably shouldn't be doing that, but it's a nice little box, and it's got the little mini cinnamon rolls. I have 2 of those, and when you get them fresh, especially the ones on top, they're very heavily filled with icing. The ones down at the bottom, by about 2 weeks into it, they're not the best, but you get through it because the next batch is coming. But so but the experience that we have, it's our ritual that we have. 14 seconds in the microwave. They're perfectly soft. You can't bite into them right away because you'll burn the upper roof of your mouth. The skin peels back. That's not good. But you wait, and then you just enjoy, and we talk. We talk about the day. We talk about whatever comes to mind. We've got about half hour or 40 minutes to do that. Some of us may not be able to do that because of our schedule, but do you have an opportunity to do that at the end of the day? We love it when we can set that up at the beginning and the end of the day. In our ideal situation, when major things aren't going, we strive to do that. But we have that relaxing ritual that is a de-stressor. So in our lives, do you have de-stressors? Do you have rituals that you do? And not only thinking about you personally, but what about for our whole family, for our families? Do we think about relaxing rituals for the family? It goes a long way in dealing with stress. Of course, a very general, again, the shotgun is out here, the sawed-off shotgun 12 gauge. A healthy lifestyle, sleep, exercise, eating habits, those kinds of things. Our ability to be productive if we're not sleeping is very limited. If we're not eating right, if we're not getting out and being active in some way, it affects our ability to cope with stress. Another area, set clear boundaries for ourselves. Not that we have to have our lives so fixed and scheduled that we can't allow for spontaneity, but set boundaries for ourselves on when I want to strive to get up, when I want to strive to get to bed, when I want to strive to do this, and boundaries for our behavior of what we allow ourselves to do and what we steer clear of. And with the exception of our children, obviously we're responsible for setting boundaries for our children, but with the exception of our children, be careful about trying to set boundaries for other people. Allow others to set boundaries for themselves. Think we get ourselves into problems stress-wise when we begin to strive to control others. And added to that, that's why we're going here to 1 Corinthians. What did I say? 1 Peter? I wanted to say 1 Peter. 1 Peter 3. Let's go to 1 Peter. Realize this. We cannot change people. I can't change people. You can't change people. The people with whom we interact, the people whom we're over, the people whom we're under, the people with whom we're interacting with, we cannot change them. But we can exert an influence. And God expects us to exert an influence. And in those stressful situations, if we can pull back and realize I can't change this boss that is harassing me. I cannot change him or her. I can't change this individual who's making life miserable for me, but I can exert an influence by my actions, by my behavior. 1 Peter 3, verses 1 and 2, we know this as it deals with wives as they relate to their husbands. Wives, likewise, be submissive to your own husbands. In terms here of talking of those who had come into the church as married individuals, and the husband is not a member of the church, and she is called into the truth. She understands this way of life, and yet there is this division that is here. He has not come into the faith. He says, be submissive to your husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they without a word may be won by the conduct of their wives, when they observe your chaste conduct, accompanied by fear. Expand it out in the workplace with others as we focus on the example that we set. God may use that as an opportunity to draw that person or to win them over by our conduct. Look at 1 Peter 2, verse 11. Back a page. 1 Peter 2, verse 11. Beloved, I beg you as sojourners and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul, and have your conduct honorable. Have it attractive. The Greek there is winsome, W-I-N-S-O-M-E. Make our conduct winsome. Is our conduct winsome towards those who are not of the faith, those that we interact with in a restaurant, those that we interact with in work, and as we interact with every individual we come in contact with? Have our conduct winsome, honorable among the Gentiles, that when they speak against you as evildoers, as they see the things that we believe that are so different from what they believe, and yet it is God's way of life that we live, and we are about to do something that is very different from much of this world as we keep these fall holy days. But as they see that, as they speak of us as evildoers, a bunch of law keepers that are caught up in the law and don't know what we're doing, we don't realize what Christ has done for us, and we don't need all that. But when they see that, they may, by your good works, which they observe, glorify God in the day of visitation. That visitation may come at Christ's return. That visitation may come in a couple of weeks as God begins to draw them. Their day of visitation will come. Will they look back and glorify God by our good works that they have that they have observed. And 1 Corinthians 7:14, let's look at that. 1 Corinthians 7, verse 14, the other passage that speaks to this with respect to marrying. Those who are married, as Paul brings out here, and one comes into the faith, he says, don't all of a sudden divorce your mate because he or she hasn't come in to the faith. If they're willing to live with you, dwell with them in harmony and peace. And he says here, verse 14, the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife. They're set apart. He's set apart as special by God by the believing wife. And the unbelieving wife is set apart special to God by the husband. Otherwise, your children would be unclean, but now they're holy. For he says in verse 16, for how do you know, O wife, whether you will save your husband? How do you know, O husband, whether you will save your wife? God expects us to set a wonderful example as we live this way of life. We can't change them, but we can exert an influence. Another shotgun aspect is a very simple one, but one that plagues us, many of us from time to time. It plagues me. Learn to say no. No, not going to do it. No, not going to do it. Have you ever been in a situation, this has happened not once to me, but twice, where you get the phone call with the marketer, he comes in from a weird angle. You're thinking, okay, I'm ready this time. I can see this 800 number. I probably shouldn't have even picked it up in the first place. I did not say no to that. But anyway, I pick up the phone, and I think, okay, I'm ready to tell this person, no, I'm sorry, I'm not interested. But have a good day. And But they come at it from a weird angle, and they ask me some weird question. Okay, well, I need to answer that. And then, boom, here it goes. And then before you know it, there is an incredible deal that if you will just spend a mere hour and a half at this place with timeshares, you get a free cruise. You get to go you can go to Vegas. You can go to Lauderdale. And then you get several days out in the Caribbean. It's incredible. But any of you that have done this, and again, I wish I could say I only did it once. I've done it twice. But you spend not 1.5 hours at the place, not 2.5, but I've spent up to 5 hours at the place. I just talked to somebody in my family, my extended family, who spent nearer to 6 or 7 hours at a place like that, and all for some free show tickets or something. Why could I not say no? Say no. The ability to say no keeps us out of so many stresses. Some people have difficulty saying no to things thrust upon them that they legitimately realize they should not be doing. Ask for God's help and be willing to say no. Another thing, take a daily break from technology. 30 years ago, it was turn off the TV. Now, take a break from technology. Have you interacted with people, or are you one of those people that is married to that device? And it is just, it's on the go all the time. And I'm not saying that it's not a valuable means of connection, but when you're in conversation, like I've said before, and we're sitting there eating a meal, and we look across the table and we see two people facing each other, a man and a woman, obviously the date night out, and he's on his phone and she's on hers, and that's they're eating out. Just occasionally we pull back and say, how much influence is technology playing in my life, in keeping things fast-paced, going all the time to where I don't get a break? Take a break from it. Nourish your creative side. Choose activities which have nothing to do with work. Those are huge areas. We must eat and sleep. We must pray. We must study. We must reflect. We must fast. If these are not priorities, we are in danger of being extremely vulnerable to Satan's attacks. And think about this in terms of dealing with one another, as we bear one another burdens, as we help one another. As spiritual brothers, our own individual health, your own individual spiritual health, my own individual spiritual health is critical if any of us is in a position to nurture others. If that is not there, it greatly impacts or hinders our ability to help others. Mr. Thompson, who presented the message to us, told us of a situation that a minister told him years back, and I think he said it was Mr. McCullough that had said this in a presentation, but he asked the question, and I ask this of all of us, I ask this of me. Are you as converted as you are busy? Are you as converted? Would you consider yourself as converted as you are busy? That's what we're getting at. Are we taking care of our spiritual health? Eventually, our efforts in our family, our efforts in our marriage, our efforts in our service to the church, our efforts in our work, our efforts in helping others will become ineffective if we do not pay attention to this area. Another thought with, I guess, a last thought with respect to proactive considerations is this: Do we look at what we've got to do in our lives? Do we look at it from the standpoint of, this is what I got to do today? I've got this, what I've got to do in the next couple of hours. I've got this and this. Or do we look at our stresses, at the things that we have going from a 7-day schedule perspective? Sometimes we can get so caught up in things that we aren't thinking about our lives. We're not approaching our lives from a 7-day week perspective. Think of it in terms of Sunday is day 1, the Sabbath is day 7. It is the end. As the Sabbath draws near, start slowing down. It is the de-stressor that God has put in place for mankind. The Sabbath was made for man. The Sabbath was made for God's people. Think of our week from a 7-day perspective and pay special attention to the Sabbath and work towards that as our time that we're moving towards that weekly guarantee of a slowing down and a rejoicing time period. Okay, so thinking about that then, let's deal with, as we move towards the latter part here, let's look at some passages, some biblical strategies that help us react in a godly manner to stress. I've got other material if you're interested in looking more into this. I've got some material on recharging your batteries, effective ways to cope with stress. If you'd like that, I've got that information and could get it to you. Let's go to 1 Peter 1. The Bible is filled with strategies to deal with stress, I guess proactively as well as reactively. We'll look at it from a reactive standpoint here. 1 Peter 1, verse 3. 1 Peter 1, verse 3. Notice the mindset, again, of Peter as he addresses what he's about to discuss with them that we all will face. He couches it in an understanding of what God has given us, and that is critical to cope with stress. As we react, we've got to have this mindset always at the forefront of our minds as we deal with the things we deal with. Notice the mindset. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who according to his abundant mercy has begotten us again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance incorruptible and undefiled, and that does not fade away. It's that inheritance is reserved in heaven to present to us, for us. We need to keep that in mind always to avoid burnout, to avoid not coping. And in realizing that, we realized in verse 5 that we are kept by the power of God through faith for salvation, ready to be revealed in the last time. So with that understanding, reactively then, we can greatly rejoice, though now for a little while, if need be, you have been grieved by various trials. We are grieved. We are, as the margin renders, distressed by various trials. But in realizing that, we realize that the genuineness of our faith, which is much more precious than gold that perishes, though it's tested by fire, may be found to praise, honor, and glory at the revelation of Jesus Christ. So those things are necessary for us to show that genuineness of our faith. God wants to see the genuineness of our faith in our conviction of this way of life and what it lies in store for us. Having not seen you love, though you do not see him, yet believing, you rejoice with joy inexpressible and full of glory, receiving the end of your faith, the salvation of your souls. Let's look at Psalm 55. Christ talks about how he says, come to me, my burden, it's light, and my yoke is not heavy, my yoke is light. He wants us to to come to Him and cast our burdens upon Him. And it is certainly appropriate and highly encouraged when we are in stressful situations to go to God and say, God, I do not feel I can bear this. This seems to be beyond what I can bear, in situations where we truly believe that it is. And ask God to remove that burden from us, because He says to cast them upon Him, because He cares for us. He wants us to do that, as Matthew 11 tells us. Psalm 55. Psalm 55, this is how we feel sometimes. There are several psalms that just really speak to the stresses that we face. Psalm 55, verse 1. Give ear to my prayer, O God, and do not hide yourself from my supplication. Attend to me and hear me. I'm restless in my complaint, and I moan noisily because of the voice of the enemy, because of the oppression of the wicked. For they bring down trouble upon me, and in wrath they hate me. My heart is severely pained within me, and the terrors of death have fallen upon me. As a result, fearfulness and trembling have come upon me, and horror has overwhelmed me. Oh, I said, oh, that I had wings like a dove, I would fly away. You know, Frank Sinatra, come fly with me, let's fly away. You know, let's go to Acapulco Bay. Let's get out of here. Take me to the wilderness, but just get me out of this. I need to get away. Oh, that I had wings and I could, like a dove, and I could just fly away. And then I would be at rest. Yeah, I'd wander far off, just get out in the wilderness somewhere and just check out. He said, I'd hasten my escape, verse 8, from the windy storm and the tempest. Now looking on to verse 10. Day and night, as he looked at his enemies around him, they go around on its walls. Iniquity and trouble are also in the midst of it. Destruction is in its midst. Oppression and deceit do not depart from its streets. Again, analogous to the individual and the wicked spirits in high places with which our battle rests. For it's not, and in this case, he says, something that happens to us. Have you been in this situation with the kind of pains? These are the most painful that I have experienced in my life. It is not an enemy who reproaches me. It's one thing if I know Satan is my adversary, he is my enemy. I've known it all along. I am to battle against him. The challenges are especially difficult when it's something different. He says, it's not an enemy who reproaches me in this situation that's causing this grief and distress. Then I could bear it. Nor is it one who hates me, who's exalted himself against me. Then I could hide from him. But it was you, a man, my equal, my companion, my acquaintance. You know, we took sweet counsel together. You know, we were good friends. We were very close. We walked to the house of God in the throng. Verse 16 then gets to the point of a strategy, a reactive strategy to deal with these situations, to cope with the stress. As for me, I'll call upon God, and the Lord shall save me. I'm going to go before him evening, morning, and noon. I will go, 3 times a day here. I'm going to pray. I'm going to cry aloud, and he shall hear my voice. He's redeemed my soul in peace from the battle that was against me, for there were many against me. God will hear. God will afflict them, even he who abides from of old, but because he does not change and they do not fear God. But so he goes down and finishes with verse 22. Cast your burden on the Lord, and he shall sustain you. He shall never permit the righteous to be moved. Take that promise to God. Take that promise when you're at that point of low that David is talking about here in the first several verses. Take that to God respectfully. I am casting my burden upon you, God. I am putting that on you as you tell me to. And I know and I have faith and confidence that you will not allow me to be moved. Let's turn now 2 final passages before we close. I want to turn to let's go to Psalm 77. It is my favorite passage to turn to when I'm going through stresses in my life and I just want to have the right perspective. I am always drawn to this passage because I think it describes the perfect mindset for coping, the perfect mindset for reactively coping with the stress that we face. I hope you find it helpful as well, because it has worked so often in my life. I want to share this with you. He says, I cried out to God with my voice, and He gave ear to me. In the day of my trouble, I sought the Lord. My hand was stretched out in the night without ceasing. My soul, whatever, we deal with, we get to these points sometimes where my soul it refuses to be comforted. Yet I remembered God, and I was troubled, though. I complained, and my spirit was overwhelmed. Selah. You hold my eyelids open. I'm so troubled that I cannot speak. I've considered the days of old, the years of ancient times. I call to remembrance my song in the night. I meditate within my heart. My spirit makes diligent search. And then he makes this statement that it's like he makes it and then he immediately yanks it back. What was I thinking? What was I thinking saying this? But I said it because I was in such anguish. He says, will the Lord cast off forever? When will He be favorable no more? Has His mercy ceased forever? Has His promise failed forevermore? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has He in anger shut up His tender mercies? Selah. Has He done this to me? And then we see the switch. We see the changeover in outlook. He says this in verse 10. He says, I said, this is my anguish. This is what I have to deal with. It's kind of like the 1 Peter 1 thing. I've got to deal with this. This is something that I've got to experience. My problem is my problem. It's something I'm dealing with. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to remember the years of the right hand of the Most High. I'll remember the works of the Lord. I'll remember your wonders of old. As was talked about in the sermonette. I'll meditate on all your work and talk of your deeds, your way, O God. It's in the sanctuary. His way is in holiness. His way is in seeking and following Him. I'll draw to Him. Who is so great a God as our God? You are the God who does wonders. You've declared your strength among the peoples. You have with your arm redeemed your people, the sons of Jacob and Joseph. Selah. You have done this. And in a sense, he's saying, you have redeemed me as well. I've seen this in my life. The waters saw you, O God. The waters saw you. They were afraid. The depths trembled. The clouds poured out water. The skies sent out a sound. Your arrows also flashed about. The voice of your thunder was in the whirlwind. The lightnings lit up the world. The earth trembled and shook. Your way was in the sea. Your path is in the great waters, and your footsteps were not known. Yet you led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. I remember what you did for them, God. I remembered when you took Israel. They were a weak people, and I took you because you were weak and little to make you an example for all the nations to behold. Not because you were mighty, as he says in one place, but I took you and I led your people like a flock of sheep, carrying them, delivering them through the hand of Moses and Aaron from Egypt. Notice the contrast of that to our final scripture here in Psalm 78, just across the page. The approach that we just read in Psalm 77 is an approach for us to use as God's people to manage stress and to manage it and come away having grown in greater patience and understanding of the great God we serve and what He has in store for us. Psalm 78, verse 40. Israel took the opposite approach of this Psalm of Asaph that we just read in Psalm 77. God knew they were flesh. God knew they were a breath that just passes and away and doesn't come again, as verse 39 says. And then we see in verses 40 through 42 what happened. He says here, how often they provoked him in the wilderness and grieved him in the desert. Yes, again and again they tempted God. They limited the Holy One of Israel. They did not remember His power, the day when He redeemed them from the enemy. They did not remember His power. How could they not remember His power? He delivered them with all the plagues and brought them through the Red Sea. Yet they didn't remember that when it came to the stresses they were dealing with at the time, and they limited the Holy One of Israel. I don't know how many of you have seen Ben-Hur. I quoted from it, I don't know how long ago, but there's another aspect that I want to quote from today. There's a point in the movie where he has been released from the Roman general whom he was rowing in the warship and was locked in, got freed, went and not only saved the general's life when the hordes were attacking the other ship, but then the general fell off into the water. He was organizing the entire fleet of the army, and he's there in the water, sinking down in all of his gear. Charlton Heston comes out of nowhere. Love Charlton Heston. He's so tough. But anyway, Ben-Hur, Judah, comes flying through, gets down into the water, comes up, gets him up on this plank that's floating, and finally gets the general up there on that plank, and they're floating, and he just sees all the destruction, and he thinks, I have failed. I have lost this battle that I was in charge of, and he draws his sword to take his life, and he's so weak. Ben-Hur comes out of nowhere, stops him, and then the guy just collapses, and then when he wakes up, he's chained. Ben-Hur's got him chained. He's not going to let him kill himself. They get back to Rome and find out that actually they won that battle, and it was one of the greatest victories of the entire war was with this battle that was won. So this general, thinking that he had done what was awful and caused the defeat, comes back to Rome a hero, a huge hero, and is decorated by the throngs. And here's Ben-Hur beside him. Ben-Hur finally is given status of sonship to this man. Ben-Hur was a Jew, and then he goes back to his homeland. And in the process of going back to his homeland, he meets up with this Arabian that's got his 6 beautiful horses that he wants him to race in the games, the horse races, what do they call the chariot races in Jerusalem. He's working Ben-Hur really hard to do this. And there's this fellow who is a wise man. Again, bit of a fabrication here, but he was one of the wise men, or one of the ones who came and gave gifts to Jesus when he was born, and now he was wanting to come back to the land because he had heard about everything that Jesus was doing, and he wanted to meet this man. And he looks at Judah Ben-Hur and he says, you seem to be about the same age as this man Jesus that I want to come see. And he starts talking about the miracles. And of course, Ben-Hur has told them his whole story as they're talking there in the tent. And Ben-Hur makes the statement, I think similar to what Mr. Evans said in the sermonette. Ben-Hur said, I don't believe in miracles. And the wise man looked at him and he said, Ben-Hur, your whole life is a miracle. Your whole life is a miracle. Kind of like wake up and smell the coffee. Look at how the things that you've experienced in your life, how God has delivered you through that. So I ask us today, as we deal with the stresses in our lives, may we reflect on what we just read in Psalm 78, verse 40. As we reflect upon God and look at the life that we've had, that God has been with us through the things that we've experienced, may we never tempt Him. May we never tempt Him. May we never limit the Holy One of Israel. May we never forget His power that He bestows upon us through His Spirit, and the might and power of God as Creator and as Deliverer for us. And may we always be thankful that He, out of His love and His care for us, has redeemed us from the enemy. We will experience stresses. Instead of burning out, may we press forward instead, as each of us thinks, wow, my whole life is a miracle.